I didn't get it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. So that's really the OUT Montclair piece, and we're putting on a huge Pride Festival downtown, 2 stages, closing Bloomfield Avenue. We're expecting over 10,000 people. We've got a lot of talent that we're about to announce this week.
Peter,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt and be off mute for a second. I'm so bummed I can't make the Pride Festival. It's just I have a bat mitzvah at Shomrei that day. Bat mitzvah to attend that day.
That is okay. A lot of people are going to have graduations and other events. It's a Saturday in June, so weddings and
Bar bat mitzvahs.
exactly. Well, we are planning a massive event downtown with about 9 days of events leading up to that major festival. And we're going to have national names on the main stage. We also have a family stage on Park Street across from the YMCA, which is going to have local talent, School of Rock, the Montclair Orchestra, lots of local talent, people you'll know, and then people who are going through a talent sort of application process. So we're really excited about the festival. I think it's going to just bring an incredible amount of energy, bring a lot of people into Montclair who haven't been here before, as well as obviously get everybody from Montclair who's around to come support all the businesses and institutions downtown and participate in the festivities. So we're really, really excited about that. And then from just a council perspective, obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but I ran in 2020 and won, and I'm approaching now almost 2 years in office, so halfway through my first term, and have been focused on, obviously pandemic survival, budget management, and then to the extent possible and that we can afford it, quality of life issues, which I consider parking, parks, accessibility, all those sorts of things. So with that, I'll just kind of open it up for questions and discussion whatever anybody wants to ask or talk about.
Yes, me. Would you ever think of running for higher office like mayor one day?
Probably. Yeah, it's something I think about a lot.
Because I'm currently running for office again in November, Montclair Board of Education, the second run. Like,
I am caught up on Noah Gill's journey. Yes.
Thank you, Noah. Let's see if we can open up some other questions here about. Go ahead, Lynn.
I just wanted to say thank you because we are new to this community, the LGBTQIA plus community. And so my middle child and their friend have been doing the young teen couple of the events. And I just wanted to say thank you for providing that support and a place to go. And like you said, have fun and do fun things and meet people. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's the best thing that I've been able to be a part of. There's nothing that gives me more joy than seeing those kids having fun. So I'm glad it's working, and it's not corny, right? Like you're actually having fun. Okay,
What do
good.
you think?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's fun.
Good.
This is
Very
what you
good.
type.
They and their friend have met a couple of people and they're on like
Yeah.
a phone chain now that so they're making friends.
Yeah.
Good. That's the point. That's
This
awesome.
is a good time to give Peter some input if there are other things that would be helpful.
Well, my other child is 10, also gender creative, so you could go even younger. There's a lot of younger kids that are
Yeah.
also, yeah.
So one of the things we're working on as a next group that we'll probably announce in May will be OUT Montclair Families, which is really going to be for parents who are LGBTQ or parents of LGBTQ kids or some combination. We anticipate that's going to be younger kids. And we'll start with simple things like barbecues and playground meetups. It doesn't need to be very complicated, just create conditions for people to meet each other and develop relationships. So that's the thinking there. We've got a group of parents actually collaborating as recently as an hour ago with a graphic designer to work on the logo. And we're anticipating a first sort of simple picnic at some point in May, and then a presence at Pride, and then having another presence at the 4th of July parade, having an OUT Montclair Families gathering after the 4th of July parade in Edgemont Park. So we'll be announcing the launch of OUT Montclair Families within the next couple of weeks.
So Peter, I guess that just raises questions for me. It's interesting because Montclair has always been known as a town that's a good place for gay families, gay couples. It was always up there in the good place to live. And yet it struck me that as you were talking, I don't know that there's any training that gets done for teachers and how to deal with children who are, what's your term now? Gender creative? That's new. I don't know that one.
Well, I
Work-
say that because it's changed, especially with the younger one. It's changing daily, the identity and the pronouns and the whole thing. So, when I say gender creative, for me, I'm encompassing the fluidity of identity. That I don't know. Did I say that right, Peter? Is that okay to say?
Yeah, we're all figuring this out together, and we did our very first event a year ago was a gender pronoun terminology session where we went through all the letters, LGBTQIA plus, and we went through why people choose different pronouns for themselves, just the different approaches. We're planning to do a follow-up that's much more expansive that starts to bring in history around the world in terms of Native American culture, just queer culture around the planet, right? To start to bring in stories and understanding of how other cultures, particularly indigenous cultures, have treated gender fluidity over the course of history. So we'll be doing a session probably later this year on that with Garden State Equality and some other guest speakers, because this is, we haven't talked about it in 2,000 years. And it's coming back, right? There's all this history of two-spirited people and Native American cultures, and like this beautiful stuff that was completely abolished essentially and are marginalized, with the rise of organized religion, certain religions, obviously.
Also, I have a question. So,
All right, hang on. Let's let Peter finish the thought and I'll come back to you. So Peter, you want to tie your thought up? You're talking about organized religions, then we'll get Noah's question.
Yeah, and I mean, my point is that the point I wanted to make really is that we're figuring this out together as a society. And I think that's very scary for a lot of people. And that's the motivation behind some of the ugly political stuff that we're seeing around the country and people taking advantage of that. But at the same time, there's a ton of research going into medical research, psychological, going into trying to understand what's happening, right? Or what the change is. It's not something sudden. It's, for me, my understanding and belief, frankly, is that it's just a shift in consciousness, that we are creating the environment, very much like Lynn is doing with her family, right? Creating the environment for creativity, for exploration. My niece is 11 years old, and she came out to my brother and sister-in-law 2 weeks ago as bi, right? And all we all said to her was, that is wonderful. Keep, exploring how you feel and what you think you're interested in and who you think you're interested in, and we'll support, whatever you choose. And she's like, okay, I'll let you know. And so that to me is ideal, because gosh, if you can allow kids to explore their identity and figure out who they really are and who they love without trying to force them into, your designs or society's designs, can alleviate a lot of suffering in the world. A lot. I'll tell you from firsthand experience, if I wasn't, if it wasn't expressed by, everybody in my world for many, many years, oh, you sure? You sure you don't want to be with a woman? You're sure you're not going to have kids? Yes. I'm sure it would have helped if I had more support when I was much younger. So I didn't have my first kiss until I was 20 years old. So
That military experience must have been harrowing.
Yeah. So this was 1990s, 1998, San Antonio, Texas, about a year and a half after Don't Ask, Don't Tell went into place. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal because, first of all, I couldn't not tell anymore. I couldn't live with not being who I was. I couldn't imagine just being in the Air Force for years and not being able to ever act on, be in a relationship with somebody that I was interested in. And so I did end up telling. And when I did tell, they put me with a group that was being discharged for medical or psychological reasons. So there were kids, young people who tried to commit suicide, people with physical disformities that they didn't disclose when they were going through, or diseases that they didn't disclose. So they considered me to have a disability or disease. They put me with those folks, which proud to stand with them, no issues in terms of that, but they considered being gay equivalent to a disease or lying about, an addiction or something else that was a reason for being discharged. And they paraded us around the base for about 5 days as the sort of reject group before we got to get on our planes and go home, right? And we would get made fun of and teased by all the other groups over the course of days. It was real intentional shaming.
Wow, that's painful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Noah, you had a question? I'm sorry.
It's true. Welcome to the 21st century. The dinosaurs are extinct. Anyway, LOL. Anyway, so I have a question. Would you start college at Montclair State University studying early childhood education so I could become a kindergarten teacher at an issuing one day? Anyway, would you ever think about starting OUT Montclair group for Montclair State students?
So
Interesting question.
yeah, so we've been in regular touch with MSU. They do have an existing organization. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but we've been in touch with them. They are cascading information about OUT Montclair and Pride to students on campus. I was actually on campus today, meeting with students from the communications department to talk about LGBTQ issues and politics and communications as well. So I don't know that we need to start an MSU OUT Montclair group, but I want to make sure that everything that OUT Montclair does feels open and accessible to MSU students.
Good, thank you. Also, we need to make sure we protect LGBTQ rights because it's horrendous, and make sure that who get reelected because of what he signed.
I missed some of that, Noah, I'm sorry.
I did too.
This may sound too political, but we need to make sure DeSantis does not get reelected because he's trying, because of that horrendous bill he signed. I don't even want to talk about it. It's so horrible.
Well, I appreciate
how do we help to protect LGBTQ rights so that way it doesn't come into other states like ours, for example, because I do not like what DeSantis did.
Yeah, so look, it starts with having representation at the table in terms of having the authority to make decisions, right? And you saw in my first year in office, I introduced the equality package, right? An entire package of legislation where we codified in law from a procurement perspective, from hiring perspective, training, that all of those things that hadn't, even though some of them were practices we hadn't codified in law, that we could only spend your tax dollars with third parties who themselves had anti-discrimination rules on the books, right? So we're not spending money with any entity that themselves don't uphold the same values that Montclair has in terms of treating everybody equally with respect to sexual identity or gender expression. So that was a big deal. We did gender neutral single user bathrooms in Montclair. We addressed non-discrimination in hiring, and we got LGBTQ inclusive training as part of overall HR training for all Montclair Township employees. So we did quite a lot of things, and we're continuing to explore things like healthcare, essentially for trans town employees, if there are any. I don't know if we have any, but that the services would be available to them as well. So that's something I'm working on this year, as well as anti-bullying ordinance.
Great. So I want to open it up to other questions. I know, Carolyn, you had a question that you warned me about. So.
And Carolyn, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
First, I want to say I appreciate learning more about this poorly served community. And I have a question about another community in Montclair that I feel is also not well served. On a recent posting that you put online, you shared a picture of an expanded a municipal building, which was called a community slash senior building. And I wondered if that was just a dream or whether there really is an architectural plan to build such a building. I haven't heard anything more since I saw that picture online.
Yep.
Can you enlighten us about it?
I can, yes.
Now, will you?
Yeah, no, I will. So our police station is near needing to be condemned at this point. It's bad. We've got to get the cops out of there. The municipal complex is in really bad shape. So you may or may not know that we purchased the now abandoned PNC Bank lot on the corner of Park and Claremont to make that part of the larger municipal site. We just concluded, I have not seen the results, we just concluded an overall site evaluation that essentially would tell us what the footprint could be of a new overall municipal complex on that site, whether it's 40,000 square feet or 50,000 square feet. So I don't know the answer to that question yet. So step one is, what's the capacity that the footprint, the size of that space that we currently own can handle? Then the next exercise is what has to be included, meaning jail, police station, courtroom, council chambers, you know, the core functions of the existing court, the existing police station, the existing town hall. What has to be included? What does that number add up to? So let's say we're approved to do a 50,000 square foot building, and everything that we have to do, no choice, adds up to 40,000 square feet. Then we would have 10,000 square feet to activate however the council decided. And that potentially would be a community center of some sort, senior or general or hybrid. That's one option. So we're on that path now, and we're making a significant down payment with a first vote next week on starting construction over the next year. So we're borrowing $4 million. We're supposed to vote on that next week. So that's real in terms of the municipal complex happening over the next few years. What I don't know at this point is how much space is going to be available until those exercises are complete to be available for community programming. Alternatively, our ice rink is in very bad shape, and we are looking at an overhaul of the ice rink and potentially adding a second floor to that. So in 2020, before I was elected, the previous council had passed a bond ordinance that included about 1.5 million to renovate the ice rink. We never spent that money. We actually ended up, and we're going to end up using it this year to clean up contamination from an underground storage oil tank at the community services yard. So I raised that to say, if town hall isn't going to have the capacity for it, there is a lot of support to move forward with renovating the ice rink. And in doing that, instead of spending 1.5 million redoing the roof, spending that money plus some more money to then just build a second floor. Because if you're gonna have to redo the whole roof, you can just build a second floor at the same time. That's the next most viable option. The third, less viable, and I say less viable because I haven't been able to get a sense of like if there's enough council support to do something like this, is within the next couple of years, our library, our main branch, has to have some capital improvements to it. We know that they're going to need new HVAC systems, which are roof-based, right? So if there's the desire amongst my colleagues to do a significant capital improvement to the main library branch, I would advocate for a 4th story to be added to the library for a senior center in particular there. So there's 3 options, and that's not to mention also the vastly expanded Wally Choice Center that the county is building in Glenfield Park, which is going to be, for all communities. It's not just going to be for the seniors, but it will be available for senior space. So I don't have a definitive, we're going to have a senior center and this is where it's going to be and where it's going to open. But those are the various scenarios that we are looking at, working through right now. And there are real dollars committed to pursuing this.
Do you know at all what has happened to the social agency building, which would have been an ideal location for a senior center? And I understand that is vacant now. I don't know what the status is of who owns it or who is going to rent space or if it's being fixed. Do you know what's happening there?
The old United Way building?
Yes, right next to the library.
Yeah.
Which was a lost opportunity that this town had. It was almost ready to sign on the line for a senior center in that building. And COVID, I think, scared all the town council people, and they withdrew the bid for it. And we lost a wonderful location. And I wonder now what's happening to it. I think it's empty.
Carolyn, I don't know. I don't know what's happening with that building right now. From a township perspective, we are not engaged in any serious conversation. As you pointed out, the council did reject the proposal. I remember this happened in my first 60 days on the council. I obviously had not been part of the process up until that point. And the finance committee on the council had made the decision that the financials did not look good in or out of a pandemic. The amount of money that we would have had to spend outfitting space that we would have only been leasing instead of owning, and then having all the operational and programming expenses in terms of staffing it. The township at the time was not interested in the model of renovating and then leasing. They wanted to look at all of our municipal facilities and see where can we own and operate versus lease and operate. So I'm just explaining what the thinking was that was explained to me back then. This was, again, it was within my first 60 days. I really didn't have an opportunity to weigh in on it substantively, and there was no vote that I was able to take or not take in support of or against. It was just something that the finance committee, which comprised of 2 holdover council members, including the mayor and Deputy Mayor Herlock, new council member David Cummings, had looked at with our existing CFO or existing town financial advisor, our town manager, and our deputy town manager. And they had all made the decision and the recommendation to not pursue that. So.
I would just like to make one comment about if you're considering your first possibility, expanding the location of the municipal building now, including a senior center. What concerns me is having a senior center at that location and another senior center in the Glenfield Park area. Basically would be 2 senior centers. One would attract the white population and one the African-American population. And I think that's something that you should consider if you're thinking about expanding it on Claremont Avenue.
Yeah, we won't know. Like I said, step 1 was an analysis of the site at Claremont Avenue to understand the size building we can construct on the land feasibly, including parking, utilities, and everything that would need to support that building on that size acreage. And then now the second step will get underway where there's that full evaluation of what are all the assets that we have to carry over from the court, from the police station, in our existing municipal facilities. You know, there's a lot that goes into that, right? There's all sorts of secure, you know, you need safes and you need gun lockers and rooms for ammunition storage. You need a jail. You need, you know, judge chambers. You need council chambers. There's a lot that goes into that. So when you add up all of those things and you're designing the building, how much space is left? You know, is there enough space to activate an actual senior or community center there? Or do we need to look elsewhere to one of those other options that I was mentioning?
Thanks. I think
It's shameful. I just want to make one comment. It's shameful that in a town where there are more than 30% of the population that is senior, that this town spends so little money in its budget for seniors. And it was not until Aging in Montclair came into existence that the town reestablished its Department of Senior Services. We're way behind the other towns, and I hope we can catch up, but it looks like we're not going to catch up very quickly. Thank you for your information. It's been helpful.
No, Carolyn, and if I could make one more point, which is all of our physical plant, whether it's police station, municipal complex, which I've talked about, or 10 of our 11 school buildings, excluding Bullock, which is new, they've all been ignored. They've all fallen into a state of disrepair. So to me, I agree with you. We don't and haven't done enough for seniors, but I also think we haven't done enough for students. I don't think we do enough for human services in Montclair. I think we are, and look, it's a tough call, right? Everybody wants their street paved and everybody wants the nice granite block curbing and everybody wants new trees on their street. And we have to do the water, which we just spent $100 million on. And we're doing the sewer, which is gonna be another $100 million over the next 20 years or so. You know, those things that no one sees, but that we have to do. And choices were made to not do these other things. One of the most frustrating things to me is everybody knows if a pipe is leaking, right, and you don't fix the leak, you're going to end up with a much more expensive problem down the road. So by kicking the can down the road on improvements to a lot of these physical structures in town, we've made the problem that much more expensive for ourselves. And I just think in general, we do need to be thinking differently about human services in Montclair. I think of it from, you know, intervention in domestic violence and substance abuse, senior services, like across the board, where we are very heavy in law enforcement. We're very heavy in fire prevention, and I appreciate those things, but we, I think, need to be more creative with how we approach human services. If it's not a direct cash outlay from the township government, we can leverage grants, right? We just got $300,000 to form a hate crimes task force. We just got $450,000 to open up an office of small business. We've got really talented grant writers now on staff who should be pursuing and frankly are looking at and pursuing grants for when we have something shovel ready for investment in a physical location for a center. I think that we'll be in a position to actually go and get a grant. But in the meantime, from a human services perspective, making sure that we are getting grants to fund and expand those services. And we've had a lot of trouble. Katie York, who was a brilliant director of senior services, left last year. And her replacement, Margaret Church, has unfortunately been out on leave now for 4 months. So it's been really difficult to not have a full-time director really performing in that role for a year, but yet we're paying out the salary for that role. So it's really, really challenging. So I absolutely hear you. I want you to know that I hear you. I see the neglect of the senior community, and I just say that it's true for, I think, a lot of human services in town.
So can I, sorry, Shirley, put something in the chat because
Oh yeah, sorry.
I'm
Or
hearing,
me, Peter.
What I'm hearing, Peter, is that seniors are a low priority because there are a lot of priorities. I'm also hearing there is no one on the town council who advocates for seniors over all these other groups that seem to get grants and have other things happening for them. And it's an ongoing problem, which is the number one reason seniors will not live in and cannot live in Montclair because they can't afford it. And I hear everything about the schools need this and whatever, but the reality is majority of the taxes I have paid in this town for 30 years has gone to the school system. So honestly, no sympathy. It's time that if that money has not been spent wisely, that it goes to groups in this town that need that money. And I'm just not hearing that's happening.
Rita,
Yeah, I understand.
Rita had it.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just to add to Carolyn's point, I would love to see it at the PNC Bank because there is bus service that takes you to that area. There is no bus service to Glenfield Park. That's my shtick.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
You know,
Fern, I want to, I was kind of processing what Fern was saying, and I don't want to just have a politician's clever response. I want to take some time to think about what you said a little bit. What I will say is we do have a services committee, which is comprised of myself, Councilwoman Price Abrams, and Councilor Bob Russo. And we do meet regularly and talk about these issues. We don't necessarily talk about it in public. It doesn't necessarily end up in the news. I'll give you one example. Michelle Dewitt, who you may or may not know, is the Assistant Director of Senior Services for the township. Her role was grant funded. That grant ran out, and we secured the money to make sure that her role, and she continued in that role. We paid for it out of the operational expense budget so that there was no interruption in the senior services in this year. When we looked at rent control, we specifically came up with a special rate for seniors of 2.5% versus 4% for everybody else, to just be, again, mindful of limited income that seniors are on. We did just announce, well, it's been 6 months actually now, the new rideshare program in partnership with the county that takes you anywhere within the county and within 10 miles of the county. So if you have doctor's offices, 10 miles outside of Essex County, you can book a free ride to and from the doctor's offices. So we are, little by little trying to address issues that come up. Our senior services programming is fully funded this year as it was last year, but that is, again, at whatever that homeostasis level is, right? It's at the level it's been at historically. We're not adding net new programs to it. But we have been, and I've particularly been focused on things like getting Wi-Fi into the senior homes, and we've been getting the routers and getting devices and getting the airports from the library to seniors in need, getting, simple things like air conditioners and dehumidifiers and things that seniors need, out to folks through fundraisers and things I've been doing. So I hear you. I don't want you to hear that you're not a priority. I'm only going one direction, right? I'm not getting younger, I'm getting older. And so from just even a selfish perspective, I need to be thinking I will be thinking about my aging in Montclair experience down the road. And I think about that trajectory and what we can do to affect property taxes and what we can do from making sure the streets and our sidewalks and our crossings are safer for seniors and people with disabilities. So I am conscious of these things, but it doesn't mean that I'm thinking about everything. So please know that you can email me if something frustrates you or you want to ask a question, or if you have an idea. I'm always open to hear. I didn't run for office saying, I know everything, I'm here to help, right? I ran for office saying, I'm here to listen. I'm here to ask tough questions. I'm here to answer tough questions and to move the needle, which is what I think any one-term council person the best we can do is help start to steer us in a little bit of a different direction, just a little bit. I see Noah's hand is raised.
Yes. So I have a question. You know, democracy is currently being threatened with the 2022 midterms and going into the 2024 election.
What about that, Noah?
We're gonna have to make sure, how do we make sure to make sure we protect voting rights that is currently being undermined, that they're trying to undermine?
Well,
And how do we
I'm going to try, and I think you're asking a big countrywide question. I want to stay with our Montclair questions for the moment, Noah.
Okay.
Making sure that we do make voting accessible here, but I think
Okay, and let's get back to Montclair then. Yeah, that's what I mean for Montclair. So one, I know specifically Montclair, we just changed from an appointed board to an elected board but I have a question. Do you think that's going to make it more political in Montclair, or like my fear, I'm hoping that the newly elected board doesn't because lots of elected boards ban books, which I have been against for decades, and I'm hoping Montclair does not do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't predict the kind of candidates that are going to run. I mean, I'm happy that you are, because I don't think you're going to represent any of those threats.
I would never.
Right. So have we created that risk? Yes. But I would argue the risk was a little bit already there, because all you ever needed was one mayor to appoint school board members with no processes or systems or checks on how that was done. And I just fundamentally trust the outcome of a townwide election much more than I do the judgment of one person in terms of making appointments to the school board. Is it going to get political? Maybe. I don't think we saw that in the last election. I certainly didn't see any Democrat versus Republican or versus independent talking points. I heard a lot of really qualified people, yourself included, share a lot of just different approaches to problems, which I think is the best possible outcome. I think one of the most salient points of feedback that I heard, besides, and I know I would characterize it as well as a disappointing turnout, but one of the most common things I heard were there were too many candidates and we weren't able to learn enough about them. So to help democracy, to help people participate, I think we just need to anticipate and have a little bit more information infrastructure around our elections going forward. The other thing is, school board elections going forward will always be in November. They will not be, there will not be an off-cycle election like we had in March, again, to appoint school board or to elect school board members. They'll always be on the general election ballot in November. So I'm not as worried just in terms of overall turnout. I am concerned about voter education on who the candidates are, what their positions are, and making sure that people are making educated and conscious choices.
Thank you. Will mayoral elections also be held in November?
At this point, they're still in May. We are talking about a possible change, pursuing a change in form of government that would have to go before the voters to approve. But I don't think there's support. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to move the mayor and council elections to November, because I think it would get lost on the ballot with everything else. And I just don't know that that's the best idea, especially, any kind of change in the form of government before the next election would make the change effective for 2024, which is a presidential election year. And there's not a worse year to me that you can put the, municipal elections in on the same year as the presidential election. You just don't want that, because no one's going to pay attention to the very, very down ballot races if you're electing president, senators, members of Congress,
Governors,
etc. So at this point, I want to get recommendations from a commission, but at this point, I have to say I really wouldn't support moving the election from May to November.
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Peter. You're the best.
so. Peter, you've been so good. We've covered a lot of territory, from OUT Montclair to senior citizen issues. We're into the elections now. Other issues that I mean, it's a small group, so I'm just going to open it up for a minute. Other issues that people have been thinking about?
No, we haven't heard from Todd or David or Lily or Beryl.
Well, I don't know. I hear from David a lot.
I hear from David a lot too. So
Right.
Lily, Todd, Beryl, do you have anything that you wanted to raise?
Where is,
It's okay if you don't. I just did this, by the way, at Montclair State earlier today. I answered questions for like an hour and a half from students on absolutely everything you can imagine. So I'm well oiled, ready to go.
so
I
if
will
Todd has-
share.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I will share that, you know, every once in a while there's a sensationalized news story about like one right turn only change we're putting in, or like one stop sign. I am focused across the town. I've got a list of over 60 intersections that people have asked for traffic studies on that are working their way through the system. It's the number one request I get besides banning leaf blowers is for stop signs and for traffic calming. And I do not, and I'm going to say this at every chance I get, I do not think the solution is a stop sign in every corner in Montclair. I think we have to address the actual problem, which is speeding and distracted driving, right? And for me, that's an enforcement issue. And I've said this to our town manager in hopes that he will convey this to the police, and we can adjust our approach a little bit. But rather than giving out as many parking tickets as we do, I'd like to see us giving out more speeding tickets, more distracted driving tickets. In the last 3 years, we gave out over 300 summonses to drivers who drove around school buses that were stopped with their stop sign out. 334 in Montclair since October of 2018. We've got an epidemic of distracted, careless, speeding drivers in town. Solution is not hundreds of stop signs. The solution is enforcement of those laws, other traffic calming measures like speed bumps, and whatever we can do wherever we can. So I'm looking holistically at this, and we're making improvements at Mount Hebron and Valley. We're making improvements at Watchung and Grove. We're making improvements at Watchung Plaza. We're making improvements to all of Bloomfield Avenue. All of the signals are getting redone. The dangerous 5 corners is under construction right now. We're looking at where we can enhance school zones, where we can reduce speed limits, and then again, just on the enforcement side. So, I just want to convey that you hear a lot about rent control, you hear a lot about budget, you hear a lot about sensationalized issues, but day to day, the stuff that I'm trying to focus on is the simple changes. And what doesn't get talked about, something else that I spent probably an hour and a half on today, stormwater management. And I have not been able to forget about Ida and what happened in Ida. And I just hold my breath that we're not going to have another hurricane this year like that, right? You never know when a storm is going to come, and it's going to, between when Ida hit and now, we haven't done a thing, right? Haven't done a thing. So people have upgraded and they put in French drains and all sorts of stuff and secured their windows and elevated heaters and stuff in their basements. But I am absolutely terrified about when the next storm comes, and our inability as a municipality, like most municipalities, to do much about it, given that moving stormwater through a community that's at the foot of a mountain is a very challenging endeavor. And we can do the best we can to prepare our waterways. But if Glen Ridge isn't doing the same thing, then it doesn't really help much, right? So we are putting $250,000 in the budget this year in the capital budget to do what I asked for, a full scoping exercise that has not been done since the 1970s, a complete evaluation of our stormwater infrastructure in Montclair. This is sending a drone overhead. This is sending cameras through culverts to map out all of our infrastructure, to find out where there are blockages and cracks, the same way we've done for water, the same way we've done for sewer. We're now going to scope the work for stormwater, and then start to pursue remedies for stormwater management in Montclair. Things like updating zoning to make sure if you put in a pool or patio or tennis court in some cases, that stormwater runoff is actually being addressed on your property, that's being addressed in all new development going forward. Again, that we're improving that infrastructure be able to carry more water out of the town quickly, so it's not inundating homes like it was. So it's just another unsexy, doesn't get talked about, it's not in the headlines type of thing that I'm trying to focus on. Rita.
Just to give the League of Women Voters a vote, the Environmental Committee of the League of Women Voters of Montclair area, we're working on stormwater management, and one of the programs we're promoting is to adopt a drain. We're hoping that we can get schools, churches to adopt a storm drain so that they can clear the debris on storm drains so that the water can get into the sewers.
Thank you for doing that.
Thanks,
So-
Rita. And many thanks to the League of Women Voters for lots of good work. But I can't not say this because I have Todd here and David. The other thing that worries me when I look at Montclair is the lack of affordable housing. So you have a couple of home court board members here
Mhm.
and a former board member, but we let him in occasionally. That's David. But I was thinking about your earlier statement about Montclair's lack of human services, whatever that means. And I don't think that we think about that enough, particularly in light of how our town is changing.
Mhm.
As the town gets wealthier and we worry about pool drainage and whatnot, we really lose sight of the need for human services in so many ways. And so, my fear is we will turn into something that we weren't intended to be, and it's just going to sort of slip out of our grasp.
Yeah. So I
And
think,
on that note, I would ask, how are we doing on Lackawanna Plaza,
Oh,
which is supposed to add a number of affordable units, but it has been held up for years by people who still think trains are going to show up there.
so the initial concept is done. We've seen it. You've seen reporting on it. It would include 350 units, approximately 100 of which would be affordable units. They are the Play 6 who own the property. It's obviously private property. It's not public property, so we can only do so much. We stand ready as soon as they're ready to present us with their financials. We stand ready to initiate a redevelopment plan, a new redevelopment plan for the site.
Mhm.
We have the money in the budget to do it. As soon as they're ready to do it, we have to make sure that the financials make sense for them, that it checks out what they're trying to do, their cash flow, all of that. So that's where we are. I've been waiting, frankly, for months to get to that point. We've already identified having what I call a scrum team, where you got a rep from zoning, a rep from planning, member from the Economic Development Committee of the council, member from the Finance Committee of the council, Janice Talley, meeting regularly so that you don't have to wait for a planning board meeting and then a zoning board meeting and then a council EDC meeting. Because sometimes these meetings are like a day apart and one misses the other, and then you got to wait 30 days for the next meeting. And there's nothing that drives me crazier than just having to wait 30 days because you missed the agenda from a meeting, right? And then it's like another month for something to happen. So when the financial plan is ready for Lackawanna and that's presented to us and we decide that it's viable, it's full steam ahead. I think I certainly feel the pressure if we don't have a grocery store. We're not going to have a grocery store open by the time my term is up. But there better be shovels in the ground. There better be some real practical action happening on site. And go back to the affordable housing. Bless you, Fern. To go back to the affordable housing piece, there's not much more space left in Montclair to build on.
I know.
Right. So rent control, if we're being honest about it, is not about affordable housing. I've said that over and over again. It is to blunt the cost increase trajectory for existing tenants in Montclair. It doesn't even protect new tenants in Montclair, because when somebody moves out, that apartment can float to market once every 5 years. The owner's allowed to do that. So that's not the solution. there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of eggs in a basket for Lackawanna because 100 units is a really, really big deal. We've tried with workforce housing in the matrix. It has not been successful. To South Willow, for example, had a 10% set aside for workforce housing, and we couldn't give the apartments away to firefighters, teachers. It was just not, it was the formula was not right for that income level. So that has to be relooked at, I think. What I would prefer is if we just increased affordable, you know, to 30% or did some mix of affordable and senior, which I really do consider the same thing, frankly, in a lot of ways. Then we have $1 million sitting in our affordable housing trust fund that we don't know how to use. I expanded with the Housing Commission the qualification for people to receive subsidies. We included, it previously only included people defined as very low income by HUD, and we changed the law to be able to include people with low income. Now we're trying to change it so that aid can flow to people who are considered moderate income. We just have to figure out a way that's fair to the very low and low income people, because of the way it's designed now is it's first 3 months or this maximum amount, whatever's greater. And that's not going to be fair for somebody to get that much more money on a moderate apartment versus a very low income apartment. So we have to figure out what the scaled approach to that is, get more dollars from development and from construction in town into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and really look at best practices around the country for how to invest those dollars in a way that you're really maximizing the ROI, right? Because we could take $1 million and I could build a 4-family home and we build 4 affordable units and we're done. I think it's much better to figure out how to use the $1 million to incentivize construction of affordable housing or subsidize additional affordable housing in planned development or convert, you know, existing structures or units within existing structures.
Amen to that.
I would, adding on to the
Last minute.
housing thing piece, and this $1 million, as an officer of Home Corp, organizations like us could really use the subsidy from that fund to enable us to maintain the 62 units that we have. It is very hard to maintain the, you know, the units with based solely on the rental income we get. It's virtually impossible. So I'm not sure what the ordinance, and we've started to look into it, what the ordinance provides, but if there is a way we could work together to figure out whether some of that subsidy could flow to Home Corp, for example, so that we can maintain and not have to abandon or sell off some of our properties because of an inability to maintain them. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, so I'd like to look at that. I do know the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has very strict limitations on how the dollars can be spent, and that's why a lot of it sits there. But I've also discovered in my almost 2 years on the council that we often miss opportunities because we just don't have people to do the work, or there's not a creative thinking approach to something. So I think part of it is looking at that, Todd, but I think also, you know, when we do these redevelopment projects and pilots and all the stuff that we do to incentivize development in town, you know, we've got structures going up everywhere, right? Like we ought to be extracting a little bit more in those processes to have a pot of money to do things like that. Because I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, people are willing to do it. You know, I get asked by developers all the time, what would I like to see if they were to do X? And I always talk about community resources. I'd like to see you redo a park. I'd like to see you help with the ambulance unit that's in, you know, whatever. So I think we just have to, I have a little bit more of a learning curve myself about understanding these programs and how they work, and then getting creative about how to maximize what we have, and then how do we add, because there's so much more. And one other thing that I'll just quickly talk about.
I'll let you close with this.
Yeah, so what we don't do, so I don't know if you were able to watch my budget town hall that I did a couple months ago, but I did an extensive review of our budget and your property tax bill to really explain that to folks. You know, we get 90% of our revenue comes from property taxes, private property taxes, residential, 90%. It's
crazy.
not a healthy mix. So we need to be looking differently at how we can incentivize and bring in more commercial. But then we don't do enough to make money off of people who are visiting Montclair, right? So people coming in for shows, coming in for restaurants. We get a little bit obviously from the parking revenue from that, but it doesn't really neutralize the cost of all the services, right? Like all the pressure on our infrastructure, water, sewer, police, fire across the board. We don't get enough out of that. So I would like to see us have, an additional tax of, let's say, call it $1 in a room night at the hotels, or $1 added to a restaurant bill or to a ticket sold at the Wellmont that goes to some sort of fund that helps offset costs for our services in town, and or could potentially be used to offset things like investing in affordable housing. So I think we just have to figure out new income streams and how to diversify the matrix of our revenue.
Peter, this has been great. We have now run over. I'm not supposed to do that. And I want to thank you for just sort of going around the room and engaging all of us. We started with a very clear OUT Montclair, which I don't want to forget that we started there, but we have now traveled through town and through lots of decades. So thank you. Thank you all for joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
You're very welcome. And I put my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to me to follow up on any topics, share information, please do. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You might be sorry, but thanks for doing that.
It comes with the job. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.